Scythian Tactics and Strategy, Devastating Guerrilla Archers, Part 1. The Scythians may not be the original inventors of asymmetrical warfare, but one could argue that they perfected it. Before and during the Scythian arrival, many nations fought by conventional methods. In other words, the established civilizations of Assyria, Babylonia, and Persia used taxes to feed, equip, and maintain their large armies. Overall, one could see the massive expense it is to arm and defend a nation when war comes a-knocking. Lives and money are lost, doubly so if you go on the offensive at the expense of your nation's pocket. The Scythians, on the other hand, needed none of these, for they were a tribal based and seemed to come together only in a time of war. Thus, most issues did not hinder them, such as the laws of supply and demand in the military economic sense, which would affect an established kingdom or empire. The land was their supplier, and demand was when they were in need of resources. For Scythians to sustain life, they had to move to new regions in search of ample pastures suited for their horses to graze and abundant with game. Well, the land they moved from was left to rest, but one has to be cautious as well, for even though the Scythians moved around, many stayed within their tribal territory. In some cases, they ventured into another tribal territory due to their need to sustain life for both tribe and livestock. When one examines the Scythian lifestyle, one can easily gain an understanding of the type of warfare necessarily carried out against more sedentary, which means non-migratory, people, like those in Mesopotamia. The Scythian took a guerrilla approach to warfare as their method, not to be confused with terrorism. The term guerrilla warfare means irregular warfare, and its doctrine advocates for the use of small bands to conduct military operations. Herodotus mentions their method of warfare when King Darius of Persia campaigned against them. Quote, "It is thus with me, Persian. I have never fled for fear of any man, nor do I now flee from you. This that I have done is no new thing, or other than my practice in peace. But as to the reason why I do not straightway fight with you, this too I will tell you, for we Scythians have no towns or planted lands, that we might meet you the sooner in battle, fearing least the one being taken, or the other wasted. But if nothing will serve you but fight straightway, we have the graves of our fathers. Come, find these, and essay to destroy them. Then shall you know whether we will fight you for those graves or no. Till then we will not join battle unless we think it is good." End quote. The description indicates that the Scythians against whom Darius is warring have no center of gravity. More on this later. Swarming. The Scythians are best known for swarming the enemy, like at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE, when they demonstrated the tactic during the initial stages of the attack. The swarming tactic is the first stage before any other mechanism is executed, like feinting or defense in depth. To summarize, the definition of swarming would be a battle involving several or more units pouncing on an intended target simultaneously. The whole premise of swarming in guerrilla warfare, as indicated in the U.S. Army Field Manual FM 90-8 on the topic of counter-guerrilla operations, is to locate, fix, and engage the enemy, but to avoid larger forces unless you possess units capable of countering the other. This would allow other units to take advantage of the enemy, which is rare in most battles involving the Scythians. The key principle of swarming is that it does not matter if you win the battle so long as you do not lose the war. It is designed to disorient the enemy troops. Swarming tactics comprise many units converging on the intended target. However, the swarm moves with the target in order to fracture it. Thus, the method of swarming is to dislodge the enemy piecemeal, causing rank and file to implode. This is due to the long-standing snail-like movement during battle, meantime being continuously pelted from afar by projectiles. Fear takes over, demoralizing an army. Roman soldiers were to have a taste of this, for they had a space of 3 feet all around them to allow for movement and maneuver in battle. The Scythians took advantage of their 3 feet, as Plutarch mentions at the Battle of Carrhae. Quote, "Huddled together in narrow space and getting into each other's way, they were shot down by the arrows." End quote. The heavy barrage of arrows would cause some to wander off. bit by bit, thus allowing horse archers to concentrate fully on their wandering enemy. In this scenario, one can argue that the initial battle tactic is to pelt the enemy with a volley of arrows, keeping the target tight in order to fracture it, which allows the horse archers to go from random pelting to accurately killing the enemy. In other words, they switch from firing up into the air to firing forward at the enemy, as demonstrated at Carrhae in 53 BC. Now, before we go any further, let me briefly make the case that swarming has many different methods or tactics, but the Scythian swarm is not like that of others. However, a swarm is a swarm, but the method varies. Case in point, mass swarming is the most sought after method in both the ancient and medieval world, demonstrated by massive conventional armies that would eventually separate or disassemble and perform convergent attacks over a region or province from its initial phase. The dispersed swarm is the preferred tactic in guerrilla warfare, where the body separates and converges on the battlefield without forming a single body. The whole premise of swarming in guerrilla warfare is to engage quickly but to avoid larger forces. Pheronuchus, one of Alexander's generals, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, made the fatal mistake by falling for the Scythian fainting tactic, in which he chased after the Scythians only to find himself ambushed and swarmed. Pheronuchus should have never been given command because he was a diplomat and not an experienced officer. The Battle of Jaxtris is a fine example of the swarming tactic, but rather small in scale. The Scythians harassing the forces of Alexander did not appear to be a large force. Rather, the Scythians at the battle intended to demoralize the enemy, and if that did not work, they could always lead the enemy farther inland and begin the strategy of defense in depth. Alexander knew better after he defeated the Scythians. Alexander understood quite well that if he were to pursue the Scythians further inland, his forces would be open to hit and run attacks. Famine, psychological attrition, none of these were desirable. Even Alexander understood the limits of empire, especially when his worldview did not incorporate the lands to the north. The battle was a loss for the Scythians and a victory for the Macedonians. However, two important demonstrations of the tactics are visible at the battle. The first tactic is swarming. The second is what I like to call the swarm anti-swarm tactic developed by Alexander, commonly referred to as anti-swarming. In fact, Alexander had to swarm in order to achieve victory. The swarm anti-swarm counters the enemy with a bait unit. Once the enemy converges from several sides, the remainder of the forces would converge on the area and swarm the enemy. Alexander learned quickly to adopt this tactic of closing in on the enemy and attacking from all directions for future use. Now, I want to make one thing clear. When I was talking about the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC and using the term Scythians, I know some will say, hey, wait a minute, that's not exactly accurate. We don't know if the Parthians were Scythians. I agree with you. It's not really concrete whether the Parthians were Scythians, but at the same time, we can't say they weren't. Okay, well, with the next lecture, or mini lecture, will be on Scythian tactics and strategy, Scorched Earth Victories Part 2. I will have that up probably by tomorrow. If you like this video, this mini lecture, give me a thumbs up, leave your comments down below, no fighting of course, and I will see you next time.